Welcome back to the Space Gulag, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite hangout place, and today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we're going to do a deep dive in what could have happened had Mace Windu raised Galen Marek, the character we all know and love from The Force Unleashed, otherwise known as Starkiller. Mace Windu, having survived Order 66, would have a vendetta. Would he be able to secure and find victory within himself, or would he fail to bring the Jedi back into the power scope in the galaxy? Before we begin this video, smash that like button. Let's try and shoot for 2,000 likes in the first 24 hours, and I will release What If Plagueis Killed Palpatine. This is a video you won't want to miss. We're also gunning for 50,000 subscribers, so join the Space Gulag if you want to be a part of our incredible journey together. If you have ideas for videos, leave them down below. I do read all of your comments, but I don't do crossovers. And one last thing, if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon, Twitch, and Community Discord. Special shout out to George Story and Benjamin Wells for being Grand Tier supporters, and Jay Hoffman is a Master of the Tier supporter on our Patreon. Thank you for supporting the channel. I really greatly appreciate it. If you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, watch to the end of the video, and I will show you how. Our story begins on the streets of Coruscant. Windu saved himself, but upon his landing he was knocked unconscious. He wakes up in a damp alley of Coruscant City. This part of the city used to be shiny and new before the Republic built on top of it, creating a temple, senate, and more skyscrapers. Windu looked around and then looked up. He was below the Senate building, enraged. He couldn't believe that Skywalker would just turn on him like that. Of course Anakin was reckless, but that was much even for him. Windu knew he had to get back to the Jedi Temple before everything went wrong. Mace, though, needed his lightsaber, especially if he were to confront the Sith again. Windu couldn't believe what had just happened. He was still wrapping his mind around it. He was inches away from ending the tyranny of the Sith forever. Sure, it could have been costly to the Jedi, but he was so close to securing one final victory for the Jedi Order. Mace scoured the city as he tried to find his lightsaber and regather himself. He was injured badly from Palpatine's lightning. Scarring could be seen down his wrists and his face, and there was something wrong with his eye, because he couldn't see out of it. Of course, there was another issue. He was missing a forearm. That was his dueling hand, and now he needed a new arm. He had enough credits to replace what was lost, but Mace wasn't clear in the head. When he found his lightsaber, he could see the Jedi Temple from afar. It was miles away, but it was burning with smoke cascading out of it. Windu knew he and his counterparts had failed. The travesty of this only made Windu angrier. He was failing this order by not being inside the Jedi Temple. He was a master of the Order after all, and there were Jedi inside that needed his help, especially since Anakin was one of the best duelists in the entire Jedi Order. No one except for maybe Sindralik inside of the Jedi Temple would be able to be a match for Anakin. Windu placed his lightsaber on his belt as he began to run towards the Jedi Temple. It would take Mace Windu a little over a couple hours to reach the temple from foot. As he ran up the stairs, there was still shooting, but the Dark Lord of the Sith was clearly gone. Anakin wasn't here either, but the clones of the 501st were, and they were going to pay for what they had just done to the Jedi Temple. There wouldn't be a safe place for them to go. The clones who had made their way to the front of the temple to pick off any incoming or going Jedi would be in terror when they saw the amethyst blade that belonged to only the Master of the Order walk up the stairs. Mace Windu cut through the clones, using his non-dominant arm to swing through, cutting each and every single one of them down. Windu may have found balance between light and dark using Vapad, but this was as close as he'd ever gone in his entire life to being a vessel of evil, to being a part of the dark side of the Force. Mace was on a rampage. Pockets of shooting encouraged him to fight harder and faster, killing any clones that stood in his way. Mace found himself a couple of Jedi holding a child. Windu knew of this child, and this child was very important for the future of the Jedi. He told the Jedi to come with them. They needed to stick together, and then get off-world. Windu told the Jedi that they needed to get to Kashyyyk as soon as possible. Master Yoda was on Kashyyyk, and it was highly unlikely that any ordinary clone would be able to kill Master Yoda. The Jedi inside the Jedi Temple killed as many clones as they could before Mace took them to the hangar bay, where there was a Jedi shuttle left. It wasn't large, but it could hold the group of 5 or so Jedi. One of these Jedi was a youngling named Gungi. The other 2 were knights, a master and another youngling. None of Gungi's class had survived. He was saved by the Jedi Master, while the 2 knights held off a clone advancement, and the youngling hid as Skywalker slaughtered his classmates. There was no more shooting inside of the Jedi Temple, so Windu prepared the Jedi for an escape. Before they left, he changed the message going out of the Jedi Temple telling all to go into hiding amongst the stars. The shuttle lifted off and escaped the burning Jedi Temple. They needed to find refuge. Mace looked down while he sat inside of the ship's bay. The younglings were terrified, the knights were horrified, and the other master was ashamed. Mace Windu felt like a failure to the Jedi Order. He was literally the master of the Order. If he had foreseen Anakin's movements, or blocked him, or done anything, none of this would have happened. After the journey across the galaxy, the Jedi saw a Republic Starfleet. They knew that if they engaged it, they would be shot out of the sky. All of a sudden, the Venators released wings of starfighters. The Jedi ship had no chance to survive against the Republic, so they jumped back into hyperspace to the first planet that was within their range. When they exited hyperspace, they relaxed. They couldn't fully recover from what had happened to the Jedi Temple, but they were able to find refuge away from Kashyyyk for a little while. The Jedi would find a place to call home on the planet Yavin 4. There was former Jedi temples all across the planet and pyramids as well. It was also far enough away from the core where the Sith wouldn't look there for Jedi for at least a couple years. As the months passed by, and the Jedi began to roll low on supplies, they decided it was time to go back to Kashyyyk for one final attempt to see if the Empire was gone. When the Jedi arrived, the Republic fleet had actually gone. Granted, they hadn't been there since the day the Jedi Temple fell, but they didn't have any resources to continually float back and forth between planets. The Jedi were able to take advantage of this moment as they landed on the surface of Kashyyyk. The Wookiees were happy to see that the Jedi had survived the betrayal of the clone army. The sands of Kashyyyk were still littered with the clone troopers and droids alike. The scars of the Clone Wars and Order 66 were left behind even months after they had happened. The Wookiees were willing to help the Jedi, and they were actually already currently holding a Jedi refuge from the Clone Wars, and his name was Galen Marek. Kento had a son named Galen, and the Jedi introduced themselves to Galen immediately. The most outstanding part was the power of Galen Marek. He was almost as powerful as Anakin Skywalker. He was being trained by his father, but with the proper training of a Jedi Master like Windu, it meant that Galen could become a very powerful adversary against the Sith. Of course, this was a selfish motivation by the Jedi, but they had been almost entirely wiped off the galactic map. The report from the Wookiees was that Luminar Unduli had been captured on the planet by the Republic, while Grand Master Yoda was unheard of, though the chief and another Wookiee named Chewbacca reported that Yoda had escaped the planet to find allies out in the galaxy. While Yoda being alive was a bit of fresh air for the Jedi, they still had to prepare in case the Republic made a move on Kashyyyk. Though these Jedi had no clue that everything had changed with the Republic, they didn't know the Republic was now an empire, or that Obi-Wan beat Lord Vader, turning him into the dark skeleton of evil in the galaxy. To these Jedi, the Republic was still the Republic, and Anakin and Sidious were still on the loose. While most of this concept were true, there were still parts that gave the Sith a power threshold on the galaxy. While on Yavin 4, the Jedi had been training and learning from Mace Windu and the other Jedi Master. They now had a new student to enter their ranks. This Galen Marek got along really well with the former Master of the Order. Windu was the quickest Jedi before Anakin to enter the ranks of the Jedi Council. Mace Windu earned the rank of Master of the Order, and he was extremely talented both as a Jedi and as a Master. He could teach anybody. It was a wonder that he never taught Anakin, but it was possible that Galen was a redemption for Mace, or maybe it was revenge. But since the fall of the Jedi, Mace found balance within himself. He came back to the light after what he did inside the Jedi Temple to the clone troopers. While what he did inside the Jedi Temple was cruel, he was back inside the light, and he wanted to fix the errors that he and his council had created. After all, he was right there, able to kill the most powerful Sith the galaxy had ever seen. Windu had all of it in his hands, the fate of everything. What became of him couldn't be possibly worse than what happened to the galaxy. Even more so, Mace, much like he blamed himself for not killing Dooku on Geonosis, spent countless nights losing sleep over his inability to make the right decision, to make everything right in the galaxy. It haunted him. Though, as for training Galen, who was lightly trained, progressed like Anakin Skywalker did when he was but a boy. Though, unlike Skywalker, Galen wasn't arrogant, and Galen was actually focused. It helped that Gungi was by his side, and he had a young friend to find relation in. Gungi was also a fine warrior. He was the only one from his class to survive Operation Nightfall, and the other Padawan trained with Kento and the other Jedi Master that survived the Jedi Temple. The Padawan was named Fenny. She was a young Twi'lek, while the Jedi Master was a Chiss named Vern-Kaz Kator, though he went by Vern. The two knights were twins. They were both human sisters. One was Shay and the other was Quanto. The Jedi would enjoy months of refuge with the Wookiees. Gungi loved it because he was representing his people with his lightsaber and while being a Jedi. The Jedi would train with Master Windu, who had finally a replacement arm attached, which gave him full mobility. Then one day, the peace that Kashyyyk had came to an end when Venators and fighters dropped out of the sky. LAATs came flying down from the atmosphere as they rained hell down on the Wookiees. Rumor had it that the Wookiees were harboring multiple Jedi, and that the Empire was here to snuff it out. The Jedi had two decisions: stay and fight, or leave. Mace Windu told the twins, Shay and Quanto, to take the younglings, Fenny and Gungi, away from the battle, while Kento, Master Vern, and himself stayed to take the fight to the Empire. The Imperial landing parties found themselves on the beaches of Kashyyyk, as the Wookiees ran to defend their homeworld. Blaster fire erupted as the Jedi cut through stormtroopers who pushed their assault. Many of these troopers had new armor that belonged to the Empire, while there were familiar elements in those still wearing the Phase 2 armor. There was something that made Windu's rage boil when he saw the same men that were inside of the Jedi Temple. It was Anakin's Legion. The 501st was on Kashyyyk, and that meant that Sidious thought Anakin would be good enough of an opponent to beat Mace Windu. Mace got a little arrogant in his thoughts, thinking that Palpatine was too afraid to fight him, hence why he sent Anakin to finish the job. 501st men were being slaughtered. The Wookiees were warriors, and there was nothing that the Empire couldn't do without some serious assistance on the battlefield. Clones were getting destroyed as they tried to push any offensive they could on the ground. Then a shuttle commenced its landing sequence. The Jedi were busy making quick work of the clone troopers. The Jedi weren't using the dark side per se, but they were making sure the clones regretted turning their backs on the Jedi. They cut down anyone who even looked their way. Windu was a madman as he used his incredible speed and technique to fly through lines of men. Since most of the battle was happening in the trees, the clones were being thrown from the platforms that they were standing on. Men were in full retreat when Vader landed. They had nowhere else to go, and they hid behind Vader as Wookiees and Jedi could be seen during the landing sequence, make short work of any clones that tried to fight them. Vader was pissed when he saw the Jedi, but even more so cause his men were falling back. Vader ignited his lightsaber as his men asked him for orders. The few who had retreated during the landing sequence stood near Vader. Windu stood across from the ramp leading over to his side of the balcony, looking down this massive beast that was Vader. Windu felt the presence of Skywalker, but this couldn't be him. Vader then cut down the clone who stood next to him, and told the rest of them that if they retreated they'd face the same fate. Clones turned around. They feared for their lives serving under Lord Vader, but now they had to face down the clone killer himself, Mace Windu. Windu stood with his lightsaber out, deflecting blaster bolts. Vader was just as pissed to see Mace, as he assumed Mace was to see him. While Mace could make the assumption, there was really no way of telling that Vader was Anakin, other than through the Force. Mace deflected blaster bolts, and then looked at Vader, demanding to know if that was truly Skywalker. The demeanor of Vader changed as he marched forward past the bodies of dead men next to him. Fire erupted below them as fighters crashed and explosions rang out from bombing runs. The Imperial land assault was a failure, and the defense system of the Wookiees was shooting down clone fighters that were hovering above the Wookiee cities. Vader and Mace stared each other down as they began their duel. Vader knew subconsciously that he couldn't win this duel. There was no way. He wasn't acclimated to his suit, and he wasn't skilled enough even as Anakin Skywalker to best the likes of Mace Windu. But Vader used his fear to give him power, to enlighten his movements, to bolster his power. Vader and Windu stood toe-to-toe as they swung their blades and met, then backing off. Windu was playing this slowly. He could tell that Skywalker was fearful of this engagement. Windu didn't let this go to his head, as he danced around Vader on the small bridge over top the massive drop. Fire exploded again, shining off of Vader's mask. It reminded him of when he lost to Kenobi on Mustafar. This angered him, because it meant that the only real duelist he beat was Sindralik inside of the Jedi Temple, right when he became Darth Vader. No other Jedi was nearly as skilled as Sindralik, let alone Windu or Kenobi. Anakin doubted himself, even more so as he viciously swung forward, missing Windu. Mace took advantage from Vader as he ducked under the swing and jabbing his blade into Vader's leg, cutting it off. Vader was shocked, and before he could turn around to see Windu, he saw an amethyst blade sticking out of his stomach. Vader's breath staggered as he fell off the bridge into the massive fire below him. Mace Windu sighed as he heard the Jedi call for help. He ran over to assist Master Vern, and when he got there, he saw clones pushing an offensive on the Wookiee back lines. Windu ran to help. Several Wookiee warriors fell to the ground as clones with miniguns stepped out of the smoke. They opened fire, and the Wookiees weren't ready. Though Mace was, as he used his incredible skill to leap on top of a building and jump into the air as the clones kept peppering the side of the little cover that the Wookiees and the Jedi had. Mace landed as he cut through one of the clones, leaving him mortally wounded as he threw his lightsaber into the helmet of another clone. Windu was ruthless as he pushed the lightsaber out and continued to tear through the Imperial lines. At one point, Gungi, Galen, and Fenny could see Windu from their position. He worked like a magician, cutting through all of those who intended to harm the Jedi and the Wookiees he was protecting. The night would come to an end as the clones and stormtroopers fell back under heavy fire, being executed as they ran into the night, fleeing the battle. Vader was lost, and so were thousands upon thousands of men. Most of the 501st didn't survive the battle, and none of the new recruits that signed up to join the Empire survived. This was clearly a victory, but the Wookiees and Jedi needed to abandon this front and escape into the Forest before Venators began their bombardment of the Wookiee cities. It was hard for the Wookiees to give up their momentum and their cities, but the Jedi were right. If they didn't flee now, they would be overrun and slaughtered. The Jedi were also told to escape. The Wookiees had held their own, and now they would use their natural environment against the clones to swallow those who had entered. This would be the last chance for the Jedi to escape, so they fled back to Yavin 4, where their camp was left untouched. Windu wanted to know if there were more Jedi out amongst the stars, but his obligations to Galen, Kento, Master Vern, Fenny, Gungi, the twins, Shay and Quanto, and Grogu, he decided that it would be best if he stayed and trained the children. Kento and Master Vern, on the other hand, decided that they would go out and search for more Jedi. Windu couldn't afford to be captured. He was the second highest ranking Jedi in the entire galaxy. He would be able to be picked out immediately if he was in a crowd. Unlike Kento, who was barred from the Jedi Order after having a child, and Master Vern, who was already as rare of a species to be a Jedi as Gungi was. Chiss people were almost never seen as Jedi in the entire history of the Order, much like Wookiees. Over the next few years, Mace Windu would guide his students to success. New Jedi would be brought to their ranks, most of them being former Padawans. Kento and Vern got comfortable with going out looking for more Jedi to join their ranks. There were hundreds of survivors out there, and they needed to be saved. On the other hand, Kento and Vern were able to inform Mace of everything that was going on within the Empire. They were never able to crack through Kashyyyk, mostly thanks to the Jedi's presence during the battle. While Kashyyyk was a major blow to clone morale throughout the Empire, and Vader's fist, which was almost completely destroyed, and of course the Emperor himself, it didn't stop the Empire from stampeding over the people who tried to rise up against the power of the Empire itself. Gungi, Galen, and Fenny were all growing into powerful little Jedi. Shay and Quanto were always a great help to have on Yavin, and of course, the other knights that survived that stayed on the planet with Windu. Though there was something increasingly impressive about Galen. He was a powerful Jedi, and he would become more powerful than Vader could ever dream of. Mace became familiar with that name, but it wouldn't matter. Vader couldn't have survived that fall, not even being stabbed in the stomach either. Mace and Galen grew an especially tight bond, most of which because Mace filled a role that Kento didn't. As a kid, Galen didn't understand why his father wasn't around, though as he got older and older, it became more apparent to him why his father kept going out into the galaxy. It was to help the Jedi rebuild. Windu and Galen had a very tight bond. Mace was very fond of Galen, and Galen was even more so of his master, while Windu had a commitment to every single Padawan and youngling that stumbled on to Yavin, it was Galen who was the most committed student. Galen was the first Jedi at lessons and the last to leave. Mace respected this because he was the same way at some point inside of the Jedi Temple when he was a student. Sure, he had his moments of blind ignorance, but more so than not, he was the Jedi that people aspire to be like because of his success. Mace and Galen would spend a lot of time training alone, on top of the massive pyramids on the planet. During storms or under the excruciating humidity, the two of them sparred and trained. Galen was Mace's prodigy. Even more so, he had himself an amethyst blade, and a similar fighting style to Mace Windu. Windu loved Galen because he was a very impressionable, and even more so, a quick learner. Not that Fenny or Gungi weren't quick learners, but Galen was exceptionally talented as a force wielder. Even more so, he was extremely powerful. With a master like Windu, he was bound to become more powerful than his master, and even be the strongest the Jedi Order had ever seen since Revan. Mace knew this, and so he sparred with Galen often. The more they dueled, the better each of them got. They both learned from each other. Galen was using multiple forms at the same time, and he was a brilliant young Jedi. Jocasta Nu, the Jedi Temple librarian or archivist, whichever have you, found herself on Yavin 4 not long after. She had established a small archive where she went into hiding, but there was an established Jedi Order that was on Yavin 4. She was going to the planet because she had visited every other site of the ancient Jedi, looking for surviving members who may have found refuge where the Jedi used to exist. She was beginning to lose hope until she saw Mace and Galen sparring on top of the massive pyramids. The Jedi had survived, and she found them after so many months of looking. Jocasta Nu also took on a very important responsibility when she returned to the ranks of the Jedi Order. She would be given the task of taking care of a very young Jedi named Grogu. He was rescued from the temple and kept safe with the Padawans on Kashyyyk. He was here on Yavin 4, and while Mace always made time to visit him, he couldn't train both the entire Order and Grogu at the same time, especially since Grogu was in a completely different class of his own at this point. With the new Jedi Order being built around Master Windu, their ranks grew. Jedi felt confident in the operation on Yavin 4. The rumors went out, but they were rumors that exclusively made their way to people that had a connection back to the temple. One of these Jedi, who had changed his name to Kanan, was with the Twi'lek named Hera Syndulla, and they were doing what they could to help the people of the galaxy. He wouldn't return, but he did keep it in mind in case he found others. For other Jedi like Cal Kestis, who put their lightsabers away and turned to the working class, making a living and forgetting about the Jedi, were untraceable. Windu was a focused master. He was teaching multiple students at the same time, and as Galen and Gungi reached their late teens, Windu believed that these Jedi had a shot at righting the wrongs of the former Jedi Order. While Windu still had no confirmation regarding Kenobi or Yoda's survival, he did know that there were other rebels out there. There was a rebellion. They were growing, mobilizing, ready to take the fight back to the Empire. Mace had interacted with a few of these rebel leaders because they were funding hideouts for the rebels. The Empire was moving in, ready to extinguish any threat to Imperial rule, while the rebels, on the other hand, were ready to spread hope to every corner of the galaxy. At the same time, Kento and Vern found themselves on Felucia, running into a former Jedi Master by the name of Shaak Ti. She had been displaced by Order 66, but if Windu and a coalition of Jedi were rallying to bring balance to the Force, she would join their ranks. Shaak Ti was one of the few surviving members of the High Council, and she found herself heading towards Yavin 4 with Kento and Vern. When Shaak Ti arrived on Yavin 4, she was pleased to see the small order that Windu had been rebuilding. Shaak Ti and Galen grew into a nice relationship as well. She was a very motherly figure, as she always was. She had taken care of Jedi throughout the temple in her time there, and she also helped the men of the clone army when she was told to be stationed on Kamino. She was one of the most compassionate Jedi in the entire Jedi Order, both past and present. This resonated with Galen a lot. While he had a fantastic mentor in Mace Windu, Shaak Ti was always a great teacher when it came to the Force that surrounded everything. Mace and Galen would have great talks about the Force, but Shaak Ti had a whole different perception of the Force, especially since she had gone into hiding on Felucia and had a much different understanding and studying of the Force. Windu was close with the rebellion's masterminds, those who helped fund it and those who were donating to it. even meeting a young Leia Organa, though Windu would come to learn that Yoda and Obi-Wan were still alive. Even more so, Anakin Skywalker had twins. Mace was in complete disbelief, but at the same time, it all made sense. That Anakin's rambunctious actions and decisions at the end of the war were more understandable. Of course, he wouldn't have joined the Sith under normal circumstances, but with the pressure of 2 children and the dying of Padme Amidala, it made sense why he would act out of sort. Mace couldn't believe it still. There was so much for him to process at this time, but at the same time, he could. He first needed to know where Yoda and Kenobi were, immediately. He could use their help, especially Master Yoda. Bail Organa told Windu where they were, but he had to be quick. There was a new agent of evil working for Palpatine, one that hadn't been seen before. He was elusive and his rage was unbridled. Windu immediately headed for Dagobah with Galen. Most of the Jedi had spread out at this point. Shay and Quanto are working with the Spectre team, otherwise known as Ghost Squadron. They had Kanan, and it wouldn't be long before Ezra joined their ranks. Ahsoka had been with the Jedi a couple of times, but her and Gungi were back on Kashyyyk, liberating the Wookiees with Fenny, who joined along. Master Kento stayed on Yavin, training new Padawans with Shaak Ti, while Master Vern traveled to Ilum to put an end to Imperial mining operations on the system. Mace and Galen arrived on Dagobah. They searched far and wide to find Master Yoda. Windu was pleasantly surprised when he found a crazed little green life form. Living in a swamp for so many years would drive anyone insane, and it was evident that it had made Master Yoda a little goofy. Though Yoda was out of it, he still was a great Jedi Master. Windu wanted to convince Yoda to come with them, but it wouldn't work. Though, Yoda wanted Galen to venture down into the caves of Dagobah without his weapons. Galen wasn't Luke, and he wasn't Anakin. He trusted the Force because it was his ally. Galen bowed down to the Jedi Master and journeyed down into the caves alone. Yoda and Windu talked. Yoda told Windu to trust in Galen and follow the Force. Victory would be on the horizon, but it may cost a sacrifice. Windu understood and thanked his master. It wouldn't be long before Mace and Galen took their trip to Tatooine. Kenobi was similar to Yoda, but he was waiting around to train Anakin Skywalker's child, named Luke. Windu told Kenobi that they needed him. He was one of the Order's best, back in the past. Kenobi didn't want to leave, though. He was bound to staying with Luke, waiting till the proper time to trade him. Though Windu understood, he made Obi-Wan aware that it was highly unlikely that Luke would be allowed off-planet by Owen, and it wasn't worth risking his time out here for a boy that could turn out to be like Vader. Of course, Obi-Wan understood, but he didn't want to. Windu told Obi-Wan that Yavin 4 would always be a home for him if he desired. It was time for Galen and Mace to return the Yavin 4. Kenobi was an unsure answer, but Yoda was a for sure no. Galen and Mace, while in space, talked about the Force. This was common for them, much like between Galen and Shaak Ti. Galen looked at Mace like a second father. He never blamed Kento for not being there, but since Mace was there, he became attached to the Jedi Master. Galen already knew how to use Vapad like a pro, and it was extremely familiar with Form 7, just like his master. When the two of them approached Yavin, they knew something was wrong. An Imperial Star Destroyer could be seen orbiting the planet. When they landed their ship, they saw a small little pod. Neither of them recognized it, but when they rounded the corner, they saw Master Yoda. He was standing next to Master Kento and Shaak Ti, who had just been slain. Behind Yoda were a handful of Padawans and younglings that had survived Order 66 originally. In front of Yoda stood a creature similar to Vader. A slimmer suit with a familiar mask, and that dark, heavy, incessant breathing. How could it be? Yoda decided against his best interests that he couldn't allow the Jedi to fall on his watch. Behind Vader, there was his master. Sidious came to see the end of the Jedi, because other than Ghost Squadron and Master Vern, they were all that was left. Yoda saw Galen and Windu as he stood a little prouder, watching this creature move in circles. The rage that could be felt from this being he wanted to kill, and he, alongside of his master, was ready to kill. Jocasta Nu held her lightsaber out as she stood by protecting the younglings, while she held Grogu in the other hand. Mace ignited his amethyst blade, and his student stood behind him did the same thing. Galen was very upset by the death of his father, and even more so, he was hurt by the loss of someone who he got very close to in Shaak Ti. Jocasta Nu took the Padawans and ushered them away from the combat zone. Yoda was feeble, and so was Sidious. Though, when Sidious spoke, the entire battle shifted. He said that Lord Vader had returned to exact revenge on Mace Windu for leaving him to die on Kashyyyk. Vader, much like Maul, used his hatred to keep himself alive, surviving even worse conditions with an even greater lust for killing the Jedi, which he had been doing. Vader had gone out into the galaxy ever since his loss at Kashyyyk, going out and killing everyone in sight, though staying hidden from public eye. Palpatine decided that if the larger suit was inhibiting Vader's functions, then he needed a thinner suit that he would best serve the Empire. Sidious didn't care for Vader's comfort, so the suit still pained him, but at the very least it was more maneuverable and thinner, much like Anakin Skywalker. It made Vader more productive in the field of killing Jedi, though he'd never faced an opponent like Mace since Kashyyyk. The three Jedi looked at the two Sith. The battle of Sith and Jedi had returned in full force in the jungle of Yavin 4. Clouds that covered the skies began to open up as rain cascaded down on the Jedi and the Sith. Sidious laughed as his royal guard stood next to him, and Vader stepped forward. Mace and Galen took their steps forward as well, standing in front of the bodies of Shaak Ti and Kento. Vader spun quickly like a tornado of force. He swung his blade at Windu as he deflected it, but the sheer strength of the swing staggered Windu. Vader, since Kashyyyk, had killed hundreds of Jedi, including the Inquisitors that used to serve the light. Vader had no time or patience for anyone that wasn't a Sith Lord like he or his master. The Inquisitorius were no more. There were only two, Master and Apprentice, on the Sith. But while the Jedi that hadn't been coming to Yavin were being slaughtered as they tried to stand up to the darkness that was Vader, Galen swung at Vader, who grabbed the young Jedi's hand and held them away from him as he continued his duel with Windu. The royal guard snapped in position. There were 4 of them, and Yoda took them all on, using the little power and the force that he had left. Vader shoved Galen to the ground as he used his might to swing at Windu. At this point, Mace was older, but it didn't mean he was weaker. He still had a hell of a fight left in him, and he was going to be sure to use it. Vader was more powerful than before. He was striking with precision, every strike intended to kill. Vader wasn't going to let Mace get away this time. Their rivalry would be concluded as he, Mace, and Galen fought their duel that led up the temple stairs that was behind them. Yoda, on the other hand, was able to best the royal guards, but that was all the distraction that Sidious needed as he shot bolts of lightning into Yoda, crippling the decrepit Jedi Master. Sidious cackled as Yoda cried out in pain when it was silenced by the Jedi Archivist, Jocasta Nu, who came to Yoda's aid. Sidious frowned as he turned his attention to her. He would kill her, and then he would kill Master Yoda, after all these years. He shot lightning at her, of which she deflected, and then a Jedi Master could be heard as Master Vern showed up, igniting his double-sided lightsaber and standing side by side with Jocasta Nu. Palpatine was very unhappy by this turn of events. Vader was fighting off 2 Jedi, and he was left alone to kill Yoda. Sidious was still very powerful as a Sith, but he was old and decrepit, just like Master Yoda. Sidious didn't have a lightsaber anymore. It wasn't on his person. He didn't usually carry it with him. He was completely reliant on others to do his dirty work at this point. All of this luxury could prove to be the end for him if he didn't win this battle. On top of the massive pyramid, Vader took on the Order's best, swinging back and forth in a frenzy trying to catch one of the Jedi off guard. Vader's enhanced suit gave him enhanced stamina. Most of his body was machine at this point, and he didn't tire easily, even though his lungs were still being operated by machines. Windu bounced back, and then he remembered what Yoda said on Dagobah. Windu knew and trusted the Force, as he used all of his strength to push Vader back, giving up all of his defense as he spun around, trying to take Vader's disadvantage. Galen saw the opportunity, but so did Vader. Galen swung his blade as Vader swung his, both intended to hit their target, but to Mace's surprise, the sacrifice that Yoda referred to wasn't his own. As Galen blocked the lightsaber of Vader, Windu saw the opportunity and took it as he stretched out his blade into the chest of Vader. A shallow breath could be heard. Galen then whipped his blade back as he cut through the stomach of Vader, who was still alive. Vader toppled over to the ground and slowly died and breathed his last breath. On the ground floor, Jocasta Nu and Master Vern attacked Sidious, though He used every ounce of the Force he could to push them away from him. He used a Force storm and lightning as he clouded their vision and their mobility as he danced around them, making his way to a quick exit. Though he felt a disturbance as he looked up to see Vader topple over. He couldn't believe it. Vader had lost to Windu twice and Kenobi once. It seemed as if Palpatine's trust in Anakin Skywalker as an apprentice cost him everything, as he turned down to see Master Vern jumping through the clouded Force Sidious curated, as he slashed his blade through the evil Emperor, killing him in one strike. While the fear of the Imperial vessel over Yavin 4 could be taken into account, it wasn't when the Ghost Squadron and the Rebel fleet arrived at a hyperspace, destroying the single Imperial Star Destroyer, Vader's personal, the Devastator. The rebels then took their fleet and stationed it overhead. On the ground, Windu, Galen, Jocasta, and Vern ran over to Master Yoda. He was coughing on the ground. He gave his all for the Jedi's future. If he hadn't shown, it was possible that the younglings and the Padawans would have met the same fate as those in the Jedi Temple. Yoda had accomplished what he could not before. As he lay dying, surrounded by Jedi, he spoke in riddles as he always did, telling them, "Pass on what you have learned. Strength, mastery, but weakness, folly, failure also. Yes, failure, most of all. The greatest teacher failure is, my students. Trust in the Force. Guide you, it will." Yoda, instead of dying a corpse, faded into the Force and out of existence. The Jedi looked around at one another and took into account what was just said by Master Yoda. The rest of the fight for the galaxy would continue. The Jedi would aid the rebellion on the battlefront while staying true to their values. Obi-Wan would eventually be able to take Luke off the planet of Tatooine. In the short run, the rebellion seemed hopeless, but as the years passed by, they took hold of the galaxy with force and rallied the cries of hope everywhere. There was hopelessness. The rebellion served the people of the galaxy, as did the Jedi, as they helped restore the light of the Republic while dousing the dreariness of the Empire. Jocasta knew would eventually pass on in a natural death, and so would Windu after several more years of seeing the Republic restored and the galaxy return to peace. Master Vern would become Master of the Order, following in the footsteps of the Jedi who guided him throughout the dark times. Obi-Wan would return to the Order with Luke in tow, and they would begin a new era of Jedi. Galen Marek, on the other hand, would inspire Jedi as he became the most powerful Jedi the Order had ever seen. He taught younglings and guided Padawans, knights, and masters into the future of the Jedi. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to George Story, Benjamin Wells, and Jay Hoffman for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes so that we can see what if Plagueis killed Palpatine. If you want to see a what if, let me know down below, and I do read all of your comments. I just don't do crossovers, as I mentioned before. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to be a part of our amazing community or support me in other ways. This is how you win a lightsaber. Go down below. I have a docs list. You click on the doc, you go to the handy dandy doc, and you type in your cool name, just like mine. And then that's all. Just read the directions, and I will be doing a raffle on June 4th. Anyways, let's talk about the story that we have here. I'm very, very proud of this story. It changed a lot. Originally, it would have gone much deeper into the Death Star and stuff like that, but I really didn't like that. There was actually a point where Vader was going to return from death, but I at some point decided that I wanted Vader to come back and not just kill Windu, but get into a heated duel with him. When I was writing this, I didn't know how I'd feel about it in the end. But honestly, I'm really quite content with it. I took the idea of what if Mace Windu survived and added it to what if he survived but actually was the Master of the Order in his survival? What if he actually helped the Jedi into the future? And I think that was really the moral of the story, is how someone as influential as Mace Windu was, how could he help the Jedi reform themselves? How could he bring them back? And I think him fighting Vader early on in the war against the Empire would have proved to be too much for Vader, but I also think that Palpatine, with his faith in Vader, would have brought Vader back to power and had him in a new suit, essentially. I think Vader would have survived the duel with Windu in the first part, because I just think he would have. I think his hatred would have kept him alive. I think it would have been very similar to Maul and Obi-Wan as a rivalry. I think it's a very similar rivalry between Anakin and Windu, and I wanted to capitalize on that. I wanted that to be a reoccurring theme in the story. While I think Starkiller would have been really powerful, and I think he would have been the most powerful being in the galaxy, I do have to say, and I know I'll probably get comments about this, it's not fun when you have a character that's so overpowered. It just isn't, because it doesn't make the story interesting. I wanted Vader to be kind of a very powerful being in the end of the story. I wanted him to be this very powerful adversary, because Vader himself in canon is already powerful, but Vader with his upgraded suit, where he has the maneuverability to be like Anakin, would be a fearsome duelist. Doesn't mean he'd be powerful with the Force, but he'd be a fearsome duelist, and that's what I wanted to focus on. I didn't want Starkiller or Galen to be this guy that can pull Star Destroyers out of the sky or destroy entire armies with this magical Force ability. It's cool, it's awesome in theory, but it doesn't work in a story. In a story like this, where I have to make it interesting, that's not interesting. And that was my reason for that creative decision. Otherwise, I liked bringing back Shakti. Sorry she had to die. That was pretty tragic. But I'm not gonna lie. My favorite part in the story, and I have to say, one of my favorite parts in any of my stories, is Yoda's death. And I don't know why, but I just felt so inspired to write this inspiring death for Yoda. And while most of us have our own opinions about The Last Jedi, the quote from The Last Jedi is it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful quote. Pass on what you have learned, strength, mastery, but weakness, folly, failure also. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher failure is. It's such a lesson for him to give to the Order before he passes away, and I think that's a really, honestly, one of my favorite moments in any of these stories that we've done together. But anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed this story. Remember, we're shooting for 50,000 subscribers, so subscribe, hit that subscribe button as we make our journey together. Join the Space Gulag, my friends. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you, always.